Welcome, everybody, to our PyMC Labs webinar on our open source release for Daemon. I'm joined by Luca. Luca, welcome to the show.
Hello, everyone.
And Carlos, who is the main developer of Daemon, and who will talk more about like the technical details so far. So, Carlos, great to have you.
Really happy to be here. Excited to share what we've been working on with Damon.
Yeah, and I couldn't be more excited because really, I mean, Daemon has been such a project close to my heart for me, and also just like from over a year ago where me and Carlos actually just like sort of talked about like the very first janky version of it, and then now to have it really like be in our chat all day every day answering questions, and how far it's come, but also really how little I knew like a year ago how transformative this would really be. So that's a big reason why I'm so excited to share this today. And so, what are concretely like the benefits and how to think about this really agent for your company, right? So it's an agent, a Claude code basically that sits in your chat. We use Discord, but it also works for Slack, and everyone in your team can talk to it. It has all the different integrations. So yeah, think of it as where Claude Code is just like single player agent, right? Here now we move this to multiplayer agent. And that really changes a lot of things. So the way that I really think about Daemon is as the operating system for our company, right? So it has memory, and there's different types of memory. It has its own GitHub repository where we store all the different markdown files of just like the contextual knowledge. It has access, of course, to the Discord history. It has access to the to GitHub, to the calls, so to our Notion, to email. So it has like all the different integrations to our LinkedIn marketing stuff, to Twitter, and that just like sort of connects all the different parts of the business into one central place. And that is really powerful from many different reasons. A lot of them probably what you can already intuit, but a lot of them also more unintuitive. So I think it'd be interesting to talk more about the ones that, to me at least, were surprising. And some of the key benefits that we have observed is one, really with driving AI adoption inside of your company, right? So I think everyone here will have like probably most of you here like AI enthusiasts who are like agents are the future, just like we think. But then other people in the company are like much more reluctant, right? So they are not convinced that it adds value. They can't be bothered. They just like don't have time to install Claude Code and like play around with always the latest sort of multi-agent loops and what have you. And that's fair enough, right? But if the AI just lives in chat where already everyone is, right? Like the threshold to using AI just drops dramatically. So that for adoption inside of an organization is just incredibly powerful. And coupled with that also is the not only the usage threshold, but also just the learning, right? So people that don't really think much about AI now see their teammates like using it in all these different cool ways, right? And they get inspired, and then they just like sort of pick it up from there and learn. And then of course also this like open source ethos kicks in. We're like, oh, okay, cool. Like I learned this cool trick from this guy over here, and now like I'm combining it with this thing, and then just like the thing becomes a lot richer. So this cross-pollination of different working styles and insights and ways of working is really powerful. And the other one is really having this central operating system, right? With all the integrations, is you just make these integrations available to everyone. So before, for example, when there's like a question about market analytics, right? That who would answer that? Well, probably the people in the marketing team, right? So they would have access to the Google Search Console and like the other data sets. But I mean, in our company, we definitely encourage everyone to like think outside the box and ask questions just about anything. So if like an engineer comes up with a really interesting hypothesis of like, okay, well, I wonder if like this effect in our marketing is happening, then before they would have had to like get access to the data, right? And that's like slow and cumbersome, and then they probably will just move away. But now they can just like directly ask Daemon, which has access to all the things. So with just like one central point, you give access to everyone in the organization to ask the same questions. And that democratization process is also just like really, really powerful. The third benefit is that it's also allowed us to really enforce standards across the company. So, for example, if we start out with like a new post that we want to do, or like a new blog post, right? So there's like certain things that we want to enforce as standards, right? Like, so there's always a summary with bullet points at the beginning, right? And someone new writing this, well, they will have to like sort of be told like, oh, well, these are the standards they have to know. So obviously, often that gets missed. But if the default is, oh, okay, well, we have already the blog writing, blog review skill, right, that lives in Daemon, that is what you naturally would already call in order to like bring this over the finish line because that's the easiest default. Well, now you really have the standards enforced automatically, right? So it just becomes part of the operating procedure, and that is just also, yeah, made us a lot more efficient in these workflows. And then just the last one, but also I think really important, is getting the critical information that accumulates inside an organization outside of the heads of people, right? So with projects, there's the bus factor risk, right, of that one person always that has like the all the knowledge of the project and all the different stakeholders and where the project is and sort of arcane knowledge of like these things. So these people become irreplaceable, which of course is a problem if you do need to eventually replace them. So with this, the workflows become a lot more auditable and like tracked because everything sort of needs to be written down, right? And I mean, that happens naturally just by the memory system, I said, and Daemon already doing that. But basically, we really make our organization robust against these things by always consolidating all the learnings and everything we're doing into skills. And then those, of course, live on, can be used by other people, can be extended by other people. And again, like this whole sort of open source ethos of like just building on top of each other and iterating quickly becomes powerful. So those are just some of the things that we have noticed in building and using Daemon. So we dogfooded this as insane. So like the token costs are killing us, but it is worth it because it really is just making our whole procedures a lot more efficient and yeah, has transformed PyMC Labs like nothing else essentially. Yeah, and there also isn't really anything out there, right? So there's like Claude tags, which is for Slack, but there is like no equivalent really for Discord out there. So I think, yeah, once people really start to use it, there's this click that happens, and I can't wait for you to check it out. And you can already do that. So there's a link here to our Discord where you can ask questions while we are continuing with the webinar. But you can also, there is a Daemon instance running in there, right? So you can check it out there, ask questions about like what other people have been talking about or data science workflows, which is what Luca is going to show. So yeah, join that, check it out, and but now also yeah, I'm really excited to see basically an end-to-end workflow of what that would look like, and I think that will make things a lot more concrete for you. So yeah, Luca, show us what you got.
For sure. So thank you very much, Thomas. I have a couple of examples that I wanted people to go through. A very brief one at the beginning and a little bit of a longer one. But there is something that you said that actually resonated really with me. And for the people who joined the webinar a little bit later, I'll briefly summarize that. So about a year ago, when we came up with this idea of having an AI tool embedded into our communication channel, which is Discord, and for many people here will be Slack, companies spoke about being AI first, but really nobody really knew what that actually meant. And we kind of experimented with this, and we wanted to figure it out. So part of our, our aim of being here today is really showing you how we're using it and the way we think about these problems, how you can implement in your organizations the similar things, and also guide you through the open source that we released today that you can actually start playing with immediately. And so I'm going to show you a couple of examples, but I have very much to say that this is very aligned also with the ethos of PyMC Labs and around the PyMC open source community. In fact, I actually say Thomas himself came up with the idea of demos in the best things, and I really see this trait and way of thinking in this because it's a way of making something that's very complicated accessible to everyone, which he has done for many, many years with PyMC and before that. So it's kind of on brand, I would say, with the entire ethos of our PyMC ecosystem. So let me get into this. So Carlos is the main developers on the project, and one thing we have in common, we both love coffees. Carlos comes from the Philippines, I come from Italy. We're always debating where the best coffee is coming from. And if you can allow me to screen share, please, Hala. I'm going to share my screen. Okay. Let me just show you the example. So you will find this thread on the Daimon playground of Decision AI. So we were arguing where is the best coffee coming from, and these is this kind of like
zoom in a little bit.
Yeah, yes, I think so.
That's perfect.
This type of water cooler conversations actually happen very often in an organization, and it's great to have a data scientist at end that can do an analysis on the flight for you. And so Carlos here asked, I want to build an interactive notebook for questions which coffee origins are reliably the best, and how much of a famous origin's reputation is just small sample luck. And help me guide to what angles we could interpret the data. And Daimon, which is not a plain AI system, but actually has skill to reason systematically through data science questions, actually proposes very specific angles that do make sense. And he says, well, I'm going to actually be able to build hierarchical models where I can bias correct what small sample size with the prior and find what the posterior probability of having the highest stars be. And I have actually found an open source data set to find that, to answer that type of questions. So Carlos says, let's go with your recommendation and send me in a notebook URL. Now, these AI agents, as the context about all the threads here, he has skills that allows him to build this notebook on the fly. And he has also access to compute. And so this compute that can be spin up on demand and can create these interactive notebooks. And it's using Marimo behind the hood.
If you were still needing to share screen.
Yeah. So what you have seen in the thread is that it actually opened up a notebook link, which I'm gonna share with you in a second, with the full analysis for the coffee origin datasets. And this is fantastic because then in the thread, me and Carlos can together review an analysis, and this analysis tells us that places where, like Ethiopia, which has a very, very high number of samples in the data sets, actually have a capping score that's reliably identified, while places where the sample size is actually way smaller, for example, Malawi, which has only 11 data points, has actually a way lower sample size. And here you can see the uncertainty versus sample size. For example, for AIT is very high. You can see what would have happened if instead of re-ranking by mean, you would have re-ranked by the confidence interval lower bound, and then the effect of a Bayesian shrinkage model on shrinking the capping score mean towards actually the global prior. And so this is a very simple analysis in itself, but is an example of us having a question that would have taken us probably some good arguing to get solved. And here it gets solved on the fly by just working interactively into creating these notebooks together. A more complex example of something like this, it's actually a thread like this one, where we did actual feature development. And I'm going to find this on our PyMC Labs Discord. So Ben Vincent here is the person that develops our library called CausalPy. This library has thousands and thousands of downloads every month. It's about 3,000 stars on GitHub. There was another library that was released recently, which is called PyMC Forecast. And PyMC Forecast is a library that's specialized in time series models. And the two are not kind of joined together. So Daimon, actually Ben here asked Daimon to do an analysis, what is called a SWOT analysis, to identify strengths and weaknesses of combining the two libraries. And beyond that, you can see that it's actually able to tag other people to get feedback and gets any thoughts regarding this. You can see people arguing about the different points and whether they agree or disagree with the analysis of Daimon. You can see people refining the points. For example, Carlos here caught up later and arrived in the thread later and said, wait a minute, Daimon, give me a summary of what has been discussed so far. And these threads goes on and on for quite some time, as you can see. It can become very deep until finally Thomas says, okay, give me a PR for all the features I need and be aligned on building. And you can see here that the PR gets opened by the AI agent directly in the thread with a link that's returned where people can actually go and see the results. So this is an example of a very complex workflow. So you have 4 people working together on feature development together with an AI agents in a thread to actually create new software on the fly, which is the new world we're living in. And I hope this has resonated with you. I'm going to then lead to Carlos that's going to talk a little bit about the technology that is behind an agent like this that you will find in the open source package.
Yeah, no, thanks for showing all the cool stuff that we've been able to get done with Daimon. It's been a crazy ride. I'll go ahead and share my screen. All right. So we saw a couple examples. Thanks, Luca, for giving us like the walkthrough, especially with a more complex workflow. There's a lot to follow there, but I think it was pretty apparent how cool it is that uh, many people can collaborate and talk to Damon, and it can follow along just like another teammate, right? And I just wanted to go ahead and like use that as the jumping board to talk about some other maybe not as exciting, but definitely uh, more time-consuming tasks and more routine tasks that normally would have taken the team many hours over a long period of time, right? So an organization like ours, and I'm sure other organizations as well, have different teams. They have sales, marketing, research, and operations. Now, Luca showed that Damon is very useful for someone on a research team doing data science work. Well, it's actually proven to also be useful for people on the sales and marketing and operations team. So, just a few examples. Before Damon, Someone on the sales team would have had to, monitor the company email for inbound leads, would have had to go ahead and do research on, the person. Are they like a real prospective client? And then created a thread or escalated, right? Now with Daemon, we actually have this feature called routines where we can ask Daemon to schedule tasks for itself to go ahead and do. And that's now one thing that it does. So you can ask it, hey, every Monday, go ahead and uh, look at the email and make a thread for all the emails we receive that make sense to escalate, right? And then for marketing, let's say we want to go ahead and make a blog post out of this cool new feature or set of new features or new library that we've just worked on. Previously, even with AI, if we were using something like ChatGPT or Claude, we would have had to have a tab open, a Google Doc open. It would have had to have been one person or multiple people with like many tabs open, constantly iterating on it, and then like going back to our workspace and asking people for feedback, going back to the chatbot and using that for iteration, right? But now, since we've kind of streamlined, and I'll talk about the primitives that allow this to happen. The marketing team has actually been able to um, codify their workflow in a sense with skills that allow Damon to reliably follow like a pipeline that they use, right, for optimizing SEO, making sure that it follows, let's say, like a brand guidelines and a template that we use. And so that's one way that the marketing team has been actually one of the champions of Damon in our workspace. And well, with research, I mean, you just saw the workflow that Lucas showed off, right? Where uh, Damon does a good job of filling in the gaps between what people are saying in a long and complex thread, and can go off on the tangents that might have taken, a lot of time for someone on a team to go ahead and chase down. Mostly, I think that's like the real blocker when there's like an interesting tangent. If you just don't have enough time to chase it down, okay, maybe more important things to focus on. But now the cost of that, those tangents is a lot less. And I guess for operations also, it's also been really useful if a researcher or a teammate has been onboarded to a new project, they can just ask Damon. It has all the context. It can answer all their questions. They don't feel that intimidation about, hey, I don't want to ask a stupid question and waste someone's time. I can ask Damon all the stupid questions I want. I do that all the time when I don't understand what's happening in threads, when the conversation is way too high level. I ask Damon, like, okay, explain like I'm a 5-year-old, what's going on, right? And all of these workflows now, more or less, are just one-liners that we can drop and we can collaborate with teammates on. So I'm sure some of you might be wondering, okay, this sounds cool, but what is the difference between this and just having, ChatGPT open or Claude open, let's say, with connectors to all of the uh, integrations and the platforms that you use in your organization? Well, I think the biggest thing is that it's a collaborative experience. So, I work online with my teammates, and what that means is that technically there should be no context getting lost because we're not meeting in person. It lives somewhere online, and the fact that it's a collaborative experience with Damon, and it can see our workspace, it can see all of those discussions, means that nothing's lost and it can maximize that shared context layer, right? So in a thread, I can invoke Daemon, my teammate can invoke Daemon. Daemon can read between the lines, it can solve misunderstandings, it can fill in gaps where things don't quite make sense. And I mean, something that I'm sure Luca and Thomas would agree on is that, we very early on, we noticed that like this was like a click. The fact that you could collaborate with people and then you could use AI effectively, or an agent to, boost the collective collaboration and just productivity of everyone in that thread. And it was just a really cool experience. And recently, Anthropic came out with this product called Claude Tag, and they popularized the concept and they called it multiplayer experience. And we went ahead and saw that and we said, hey, wait a minute, that's exactly what we've been doing for quite some time now. So it's nice to see some validation that okay, like this isn't just something that's unique to our org. It's like it's something that works for everyone, right? We just didn't really I guess we were just too focused on like uh using it to really step back and think about it as like an experience or a concept.
Perfect is
So I'm sure,
suiting
yeah,
everyone. But yeah, like on that point, like that for me is like such a huge win, your previous slide. Where before, I mean, most of the things I was doing with AI came from just like the context in chat, right? So what I would do often is then just like take the thread, right, and like copy and paste everyone's comments, paste into Claude Code, like then maybe like copy paste like other documents or emails, right? Just like to always construct the context on the fly for that particular question that I was working on. Of course, then the AI would write something out that I would then copy and paste maybe back into the thread to like, so, oh, here's like what my AI did. And then it would just like get confusing and really inefficient, right? You'd never want to copy and paste. So there, like, it's really just like a tag away. We're like, oh, well, it knows all the context, it knows all the threat history, what everyone has said, and then we'll also respond there, and then people chime in and build on top of that. So yeah, it's like a massive efficiency gain there.
yeah, totally. Thanks for adding. Like, you couldn't have said it better. That was my life as well. I think that was the life of a lot of people before, or at least that was a life of a lot of people before they started using agents in their chat or an agent like Daemon. Um, but yeah, so I'm sure some of you might be wondering, okay, so there's Daemon and Anthropic came out with Cloud Tag, but there are a lot of agent frameworks out there, and the something like the one that no one can deny popularized the concept of an agent is OpenClaw, right? And then later on, Hermes came, and it's sort of the agent people the agent framework people go to when they want something a little bit more evolved. So the question is, why didn't we just take one of these and fork it and essentially turn it into our agent? Why did we decide to roll our own agent? And I think it comes down to what we're betting on and what works for our org. So, there are a lot of primitives that are kind of shared between these agent frameworks, but over time and over a lot of dogfooding and a lot of iteration, there are a few primitives that we've, placed heavy assumptions on and we've placed our bets on. So things like the tools that our agent has access to are we have assumptions about how those tools work, the fact that it needs to have access to all of the platforms and the uh, like the same tools that we have access to, the fact that it has to have the same assumptions about the platforms and the tools that we use, whether or not it acts as the user or acts like as a service account. Like these are things that we thought about and have experimented on. So I'll talk about uh, how this came to be, I guess. And it's not really just sitting down and planning and thinking really hard. I think just like any product out there, at the end of the day, the only real validation is when your end users use it and your end users love it, right? Or hate it. I think actually it's probably we learn the most and people hate it. So I think the reason why Damon's at the place it is today is because it wasn't smooth sailing the entire time. And from every point of friction, we took that as a learning and then turned it into a primitive that we essentially built out and bet on. So, for example, I'll just go through each of these like concrete examples. Just like any org out there, we have many teams. We have a sales team, a marketing team, a research team. And we realized while working with Damon that when the sales team says something, says a specific word, that same word might mean something completely different to the marketing team. When the sales team says pipeline, that might mean something very completely different to the research team. And so what we realized that it's very important to scope daemon, or at least the configuration of daemon at that specific instance to who's calling it, specifically from what team they are in. What assumptions does that team have, right? And so how we did that is pretty simple. We have channels for teams, and we just scope a specific configuration of daemon to a specific channel. Um, Another thing that we realized early on is that it's very important that anyone invoking daemon can reasonably assume what is in its context window and what's in its file system. So early on, we decided, okay, uh, every single session of daemon, every single turn that someone starts, it's going to have an isolated VM. Uh, we're going to choose a repository that it can clone on start every single time, freshly cloned. And that repo will essentially act as its context, right? So the fact that the repo acts as its context, or I guess you could think of it actually as its memory, means that it's auditable. It's not this ever expanding thing that will eventually, bloat. Uh, all changes are pull requests that you can audit, and it's essentially it's a primitive that people are familiar with, right? People are familiar with repositories. There are lots of memory frameworks out there, but it's still very experimental. And another example here is the credentials, right? So early on, I was, as a developer and thinking of all these features with AI, it's so easy to push things out. I very early on said, oh, well, we can make it so that when Daemon pushes code, it'll push code using the token of the invoking user, because I would use that. But obviously, when I brought that idea up, I pushed the feature, I realized, okay, not everyone shares the same view. Not everyone wants Daemon to push code as them. Some people would rather have Daemon push code as Daemon. And we realized that credentials and like security are one of the most important parts of the puzzle. So Daemon runs permissions as the caller, but all of the credentials and keys that it uses have been decided, like curated, depending on the platform, depending on the context.
Yeah, I feel that that was like an important learning for sure. Is like you mentioned with the GitHub, right? The first was like, oh, like everyone basically gives like makes a connection so that then Damon could act on their behalf in GitHub. But people were like really sort of weirded out that like, oh, but then like does it like it impersonates me? Can it access my files? Which it can't. But then switching it to like, oh, okay, well, Damon will have its own GitHub account and will have its own email address, right? That I think also really unlocked. So really treating Damon as like a team member, right? That will have context and maybe channel specific adaptations, but still has its own like individual accounts where possible and operates on that basis and also has like the context so that it's really much more like another team member rather than like some nebulous AI that lives distributed across many different things.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, these are just a few. I had to choose because there were so, so many, but it's I think one of the biggest learnings that we've had working on Daemon is that nothing beats a real world usage for a product like this. And it's taught us so much, which is why we're so excited to, open source and share this experience with you. So that's more or less how Daemon works from like an architecture perspective. We have isolated VMs that initiate per session. We have configs that are scoped to channels and teams, the way that our org works. We have like very opinionated tools that are specific to how our org works. And of course, uh, thinking about how we want to, distribute this experience, in itself was also like a bit of an undertaking. Um, but what we decided on was, okay, um, we're going to open source Daemon. We want to give this experience to other people. So what we're going to do is we're going to give you guys essentially different ways to interact with it. You can either self-host and roll everything your own. You can try it live right now in our Discord. Uh, and again, like on our Discord, it's configured to have like skills to do like the notebook stuff that you saw Luca demo. And we're actually working on, so this will be out next week. We're working on a one-click experience where we manage the infrastructure and the deployment, and you just install the bot into your Discord. And then after Discord, we're working on a Slack version. So actually, real quick, I'm going to show because it's actually really crazy how easy it is. Um, is my screen sharing? Good. Okay. So it really is just a one-click experience. All you have to do is just click the link that we will release in about a week, and then you install it into your server, and then that's it. It can do all the things that we've shown so far. So I can go ahead and say hello. And it's going to go ahead and oh, well, okay. I already had the bot installed, so it's configured to another bot. But I can go ahead and ask it to do things just like in the demo. Just like as a quick tour, I can go ahead and configure this agent however I want. I can, so I think, yeah, I can edit its configuration essentially to add a repository that will clone on start for every session. I can add skills from repositories. I can add my own MCPs. I can add credentials, so secrets, if I wanted to. And then when all of this works, I set up this agent. This is what it looks like. It has its, context 7 MCP. It has different skills, and I can scope this configuration to any server I want into this in this any channel I want in this workspace. So that's how easy it is. I can ask it to uh, debug code. I can ask it skills. So we're really excited to share this experience with you. We're just iterating to make sure that it just works out of the box. Um, but hopefully, what this one-click experience gives you is just the same exact experience that all of us have been having since we started working with Daimon. So it can also read different threads. It can read channels. You can collaborate with teammates and uh, use it the same way that we showed in this webinar. Okay, so that's just a very, very brief tour of Daemon. And so far, development is not stopping anytime soon. And we're pretty happy to start to move development from working on, oh, yeah, sorry, my screen stopped sharing. We have like a landing page where I can drop this in the chat real quick. Oh,
We
okay.
already have it.
Thanks. So we have like a bunch of demos here about how it works. The GitHub's in the top right. Um, yeah, we're really happy to move development from working on this internally to working on this open source. So now any features that we work on for ourselves, you can go ahead and try just by forking the repository. Yeah. So I think,
Yeah. And
yeah,
we I mean, we position this as like a data science agent, and that is like part of what makes it special. But really, I mean, it is a Claude code that's running in your team chat with like a lot of the sort of workflow kinks worked out of like, oh well, yeah, how do you have it respond? Like, do you only have it respond in like when it's called automatically, and routines and like scoping, and so all of these things really that we had to figure out alongside of just like how to run it and make it host things. And the other, like, I guess, killer feature that we haven't really showed is also the ability for it to like spin up servers. So we have this running on Fly.io, where, for example, like one of the use cases was to spin up a dashboard of like just overview of how our marketing is doing, right? And obviously agents can like vibe code that just fine, but then Daemon cannot only like sort of code it up and push it to repo, but also then like deploy it or host it, or bring up the Marimo server, or like Luca showed. So that ability to then not just like have everything be forced inside of chat, right? But then the ability to move outside of it. We're like, okay, well now that analysis just makes a lot more sense to continue inside of a Jupyter notebook or a Marimo notebook. You just spin it up and then you click there. You can still interact with Daemon through the interface, and other people can join in. So that yeah, there's like many sort of small gimmicks that like have made it just a lot more powerful and really do make a difference.
There is a really good question in the thread from Akaba, which is, I'm curious to understand, when building agentic apps, it's typically being good to limit agent context as much as possible to reduce hallucinations. And how is it tackled is in Daemon today, where it has access to all the company? And do you prevent it getting lost? Do you have any thoughts, Carlos, about that? And you already explained part of it with sandboxing and the different compute, but maybe you want to kind of address this specifically.
it's a very good question, and it's definitely something that we've run into. So we've also spent many hours, or at least I've spent many hours trying to think of the best way to tackle this. And it's there are two you can tackle it from two angles, right? So there's tackling it before the data even gets there, and then tackling it once you have to start retrieving that context, right? So one way we tackle this, especially when when people, there's sort of this implicit prompt that they never say, which is, I want you to remember everything you've ever done for me, and remember all the times I've told you that you did something wrong, right? There's like this implicit ask of, we have to have the same assumptions. You have to be on the same wavelength as me, and we have to be aligned. And that's tough when people just don't have the same assumptions, that people don't operate on the same level of context. And so how we've tackled this is we've given people more responsibility by forcing the repository to act as memory. It's the first thing it sees, it's its file system. If the agent wants to reach into our historical context, the agent will need to go ahead and decide to use tools, right? So we have another layer of control there with how tools are described, their argument names, and all these other things. But I think that's really the main thing, is that the first thing that hits the context is its file system, which is a repository that we take responsibility for, and we audit, and we make sure that um, all of the PRs that are submitted essentially to the memory, the repo that acts as memory, are good quality, and when they're merged, they're as good as true, right? Hopefully that answers the question.
Yeah, and I think one thing again to highlight on what you said is that the memory is managed via GitHub with pull requests. And so you can always diff what's happening, and there is a log of how the memory has evolved. And we find this very effective way of managing it. I'm not aware of any other frameworks out there that actually do something similar. And it works extraordinarily well. Because the agents can always reconstruct of how the memory has evolved over time by just using GitHub tools. Now, there is another very good question, which is, can you also share a bit more how many iterations are required to get Daemon workflow useful? Does it mean that every workflow needs to be generalized within a new set of skill? What is the best way to customize Daemon in my enterprise? I'm going to start addressing that because I've seen this developed throughout the teams in surprising ways that I wasn't expecting before. And the actual reality of it is that it happened kind of organically. For example, Hala here was the person who organized the webinar, has automated tons of workflows around marketing, content creations for our blogs and for our general LinkedIn and X using Daemon. And of course, if you do that in a not thoughtful way, you get AI slop published out, which we don't want. And so she had over time to develop a set of skills that would refine Steve's workflows and get them exactly at the point that they produce high quality content. And the actual thing is that we didn't know how to do that because it's very domain specific. She has the expertise of creating the carefully crafted prompts and to set the guardrails and to teach the skill to Daemon that we needed. So the way that we actually did was the other way around. We put the tool in the hands of the last mile users. We gave some tutorial and training on how to use the skills, and we basically is as simple as saying, hey Daemon, next time you do this, remember, codify this in a skill and remember to avoid these and that mistakes. That opens a pull request on the Daemon's context, then it's merged in, so the skill is crystallized, and then next time it will happen always in the same way. But the key here was it happens over time and it happens collaboratively. Now, the Daemon that you will find on Decision AI, it's not our main internal agents that has actually access to like all the knowledge of all our clients' engagements and so on and so forth. But it's, of course, it's public versions of it. What you will see is that over time, you kind of get this exponential curve where as more users add context, add workflows, add ways of working, the ability of these agents to give you more nuanced answers and more effective answers, it's going to compound over time naturally in your company. So there's kind of like a curve here that starts relatively slow at the beginning and then takes off kind of in a very sudden way.
Yeah, and there are 2 points I want to repeat. One is definitely having a monorepo. I mean, that's a choice, but for me, this has been like for my own workflow. So I have a monorepo, which is like my context for myself. But then Damon also has a monorepo with like all the organizational knowledge, basically. So there's like a teams directory with like sales and marketing, and that's where every team has also their own space, right? So the sales team has then skills files in teams sales skills of their procedures, and they own that. And if they update that, they make a pull request, so it's all traceable. And that is, has been really powerful for managing these different things. And related to that is that we really ask people to try and be self-empowered. I mean, there are definitely things where like we would like bring in Carlos, we're like, oh well, it lacks that feature or there's a bug or something. But for the most part, users are just told to like use it and refine it themselves, right? So there's like patterns that they don't like in the response, and then everyone can just like say, oh, like update yourself to do that. So this Not just like everything becoming like a support ticket and then like months later you're like, oh, I guess like now it like doesn't write EM dashes. No, like everyone can and should update this, and they do all the time. So like from all these different angles, it's just compounding, but it's not also then a complete mess, and everyone's just like on top of each other because of the per channel scoping. So and of course then also like having different parts of the memory monorepo dedicated to different people. Um, yeah, so those I think have also been like really important learnings. We have some other questions. Thomas mentioned that the token costs were quite. Did you have a comment, Luca?
Oh yeah, so this is Jim's question. Hey Jim, Thomas always complains about tokens costs. They are not that high at all. They are just a few $1,000s per month. Now we are a small organization. And like the implementations, we know that there is efficiencies we can take to reduce the cost about 20, 30%, but it's something in the order of like a few $1,000s. And at this stage, it's nothing like actually major. And so it is an agent that actually is being extremely used into our organizations. But the usage pattern is not, we're not talking about, a coding agent that codes 24/7. So that usage pattern would actually be way more expensive. The daemons gets activated by cron jobs on time and when you call it. And right now our organizations is 40 people or 45. So it's really like manageable in terms of costs.
Yeah, that's right. And the fact that like the token costs are like not zero means just like how it's getting used, right? So the value we're getting out of like every dollar spent on tokens is like massive because yeah, people are like automating their workflows and there's just a lot less overhead. So in terms of like the velocity of the processes, it's like a very worthwhile investment. But at the end of the day, I mean, it is just like Anthropic token costs, and that will cost as much as they cost for the amount that you use tokens. So yeah, there's like no extra uh, cost in it. Oh yeah, this is a good question to Carlos. Is it on the roadmap to load other models other than Anthropic models? Yeah, for example, like could you have Kimi K3 be the driver?
Yeah, definitely on the roadmap. So the reason why it's not there yet is because we really wanted to focus on. So like the way that I think about it right now is, okay, put aside token costs for a moment. If you get any good model out there, you get any good harness out there, what really matters is the context. And so we really wanted to focus on getting that right with configs and scoping channels and like where do your assumptions live. So I think something to add to the question earlier about how to make it like generalize. I think the more that you can not have the agent guess, the better that the experience is going to be. And we really focus on that. So part of that focus means kind of leaning on Anthropic for infrastructure and for um, you know running the models, just not having to deal with uh, API breakage and maintenance on that front. But now that we've, I think, really nailed, at least we've satisfied ourselves with the other side of the pie. Definitely on the roadmap is not just like allowing other models, but potentially even allowing other harnesses, right? Or like uh, sandbox primitives, right? So that is definitely something we're thinking about and we'll start working on.
That is actually not that easy, right? So the way that the development is you had a lot of work early on, like where to host it and whatnot, and then using the Claude Agent SDK, which was like great, but obviously like Anthropic. But then Anthropic came out with like managed services, which like made sort of this hosting even simpler. So I mean, they just like did a really amazing job with the whole tooling and like infrastructure building blocks around it. That was just like and I mean the OS version, right, is like rewritten a couple of times, just like based around like sort of the latest thing, usually from Anthropic, because they made that so easy to um, yeah, get the right infrastructure with the right sandboxing and sort of scoping to run these things just really easily. And yeah, that's why it's Anthropic only so far, and also like not super trivial then actually to switch to other model providers. Yeah, so we get a lot because we built on the Anthropic stack. Yeah, Carlos, anything that I got wrong or that you want to add?
No, totally on the point. Yeah.
Okay. Um,
There's a good question, which is, what other features would you like to see? It's a good question. I mean, we're constantly adding new features. I think in terms of like in terms of like what other features we would like really to see in here that are kind of like important for us, it, it it really depends on our setup of our business. So fundamentally, PyMC Labs is a consulting business, very decentralized. We build virtual teams for every client engagement we have. And we find tremendous value, for example, of things like summarizing client meetings, managing the linear board that has to do with the project. Being able to answer, like in a thoughtful way, client questions, given that context of the clients meeting we have, the code base we have developed for them, and some of the best practices we have, we can actually brainstorm with Daimons how to address specific client questions or how to pivot the project in a certain directions, having actually summary of what people have done throughout the week. And all of these we get kind of like already in place today in most of the engagements we have. I think some interesting things that we are thinking about to do in the futures and we want are things like, for example, the ability to add compute for the most intensive projects, the ability to connect to things like model. We're using models for training some of the neural networks for some of our project and client engagements. That's something that we could reasonably easily add to kind of Daemon and be able to also develop some of these models collaboratively within the threads. The other things is integrating specific data sources. For example, like every company that work on client leads and clients engagements, we have a Salesforce database which has a data enrichment flow. And today it's partially connected to Daemons. We want to make use of that even more into our sales processes. So these are kind of the things that immediately come to mind. And for like usage of the company. But in terms of like broad overall visions and where we think our clients are going to find values for Daemons, I think one of the things that we are most excited about is that the way people have thought about analytics so far has been always about developing very sophisticated models for decision making, disconnecting them from actions downstreams that needed to be taken by humans. Now, with agents like Daemons, you can actually connect the two things in a kind of a seamless way. So think about the flow where you are a CMO and you are a CFO discussing your latest and greatest strategic insights about what you need to do for next quarter. And you can ask then a data scientist like Daemon, an agentic one, on the fly to do the analysis. And then you can ask on the fly in the same like thread after you agree on what to do, to take actions, which means go and change the marketing budgets in the different channels. So creating this end-to-end loop across our ecosystems of toolings, from the modeling side to the action side, using an agents like Daemon is what I think we're still missing, but we are very, very close to deliver for some of our engagements.
Yeah, great points to wrap up. And then the very last thing, just wanted to also announce our Master Agentic Data Science course, called with Hugo and of course Luca here. So yeah, if you want to learn how to wrangle agents to do data science and analysis workflows like what we showed today that are verified and not just slop, then definitely check out this course. We already had the first iteration of it a month ago and got really amazing feedback and developed the materials a lot further. Obviously, agentic data science is like the hot new topic, and yeah, we're very excited about how far we can push this. And Daemon is like very much a project out of this entire thrust of like, okay, well, what does data science really look like in the post-AI world? And I think we're really just scratching the surface of what is possible and what we'll see. And there's a lot more to come. And also specifically how it relates to Bayesian modeling and PyMC, of course, where the big problem always has been that like these methods are quite difficult to employ and bring into an organization, use in an organization. And that's where like agents can be extremely powerful. We have Decision Lens, which is a project where you can interrogate models. You have a dashboard, and then you can ask people, and then you can ask the agent for like really deep questions on your MMM result, so that you don't always have to go to a data scientist to then really get the answers, but you are much more empowered to really do these things yourself. And that's also how we're thinking about Daemon, right? So like those marketing budget questions can be asked to Daemon. It will have all the PyMC marketing, amazing Bayesian M&Ms, but also their particular configurations hooked up to the latest data sources, right? So just like the workflows can become incredibly rich and powerful. And yeah, once you start establishing these loops and increasing them, magical things start to happen. So yeah, very excited about this and the course. If you want to join, we're very excited to have you on board. So I think with that, yeah, thanks everyone for tuning in. We hope to see you in the Decision AI Discord. Thanks to Carlos and Luca for joining today, and have a great rest of your day.